know what, this is like old home week. Tom and I have had an opportunity to meet some of you in the room, certainly not the majority of you. And what a joy it was to see everyone congregating. It's sort of like we had a little party here, and I'm so happy that the Salvation Army gets to be part of that. So thanks for taking time from your very busy schedules to come out and support the Army. It's obvious that we're here to do something with the Red Kettles, but before we get into that part of the program, Joseph and Joanne have asked me to talk with you just a little bit about the Salvation Army. I love to do. I'm passionate about it. Colonel mentioned I've been on the Phoenix Advisory Board for 30 years and on the National Advisory Board for 15. The Army is a very easy organization to fall in love with. And you just start dabbling in it, and then all of a sudden you're hooked. And the goodness that you see through the uniforms and the people in those uniforms and what they do. And I've had the privilege to see it locally and nationally, and it just blesses my heart. And people don't have a clue. I think that one of the most common things that I hear nationally and all the way down local is it's the best kept secret, and it is. It's because the Army's more concerned about being out front doing their work and getting that done. But why don't you spend a couple minutes talking about the history of the Salvation Army. William Booth is our founder. The Army was founded in 1865 in London, England, and William Booth was a Methodist minister. And I have to mention Catherine too, because she was dynamic. They had an incredible love story between them, not just between themselves, but between the people they served. And their passion was serving the downtrodden, the people that no one else wanted to serve. The drunkards, the thieves, the prostitutes, just those kinds of people. And in those days, in England and in that area, the churches really didn't want those people in their pews. And it was so blatant, sometimes they would charge to sit in a pew to make sure that those people stayed out. So their mantra, William Booth's mantra, soup, soap, and salvation. And he felt very strongly, they both felt very strongly, that until you minister to the personal needs of an individual, you can't get to the spiritual needs and what they really wanted to do. But along the way, you know, you can see some of the things, and these are just a few of the things they started getting involved in, and they were pioneers in these areas, I would say. And I'm always intrigued learning more about what they did in human trafficking. I have to think that William Booth was one of the first people in the world to recognize, in history and the world, to recognize the issues we have with human trafficking, and it's still with us today. The Missing Persons Bureau that you see up there, in the United States alone last year, the Salvation Army brought together 150,000 people. Most people don't know that there's a Missing Persons Bureau, but the Salvage Army's thrift store that started with the Salvation Army in the late 1800s in New York City, and the concept now has been picked up, obviously, by so many organizations and people. But the Booths had 8 children, most of whom were involved in the Salvation Army, and I want to just mention 2 today. Bramwell was their oldest son, and he was the first chief of the staff. When William Booth set up the Army, he set it up in a militaristic style, and that's why you heard from Lieutenant Colonel Hogan and Colonel Hogan, and that happens all over the world. The international headquarters for the Salvation Army is still in London. I didn't mention, but the Salvation Army is a church, and it is active 24/7, 365 days a year in 125 countries and in even more languages. So this military uniformity has carried down these many years, as we're nearing 150 years actually. Bramwell was the second general when his father stepped down. But Evangeline Booth has such a fascinating story, and the women in the audience, I think, will especially appreciate this. She came to the United States, and in 1903 was named the national commander for the United States. Now, there are 5 people who oversee everything that goes on in the country, but one person is over the whole thing. Can you imagine being a 32-year-old woman in 1903 coming to the United States to be the national commander? And she hit so much junk, is the only way I could have, but you know what? She was amazing. And she carried on her duties in such an incredible way. And she went on to become the general, but what I want to really tell you about her is that she was our national commander when the United States went into war in World War I. And she felt the need for the Army to be doing something, so she sent a small contingency embassy over to France to see, is there really something for us to do? And that's a trait that the Army still does today. Before they embark on anything for any disaster or any issue, they always go out, check the situation, make an assessment, and see if it's what they should do. You know what? It was. They contacted her and said, send reinforcements. She sent 250 Salvationists, those are the members of the church, 250 men and women, and these men and women served in the trenches with our troops in World War I. And they lived the horrific lives that those men and women had to live during those war years. And they would sew buttons, they would sew, they would cook, they would write letters back home to their parents. They would conduct funerals. They would go with the troops to a funeral. They would console. They would give them the spiritual support that they need. And in August of 1917, the troops had just experienced 36 days of rain. The morale was in the tank, as you can imagine. They were in mud up to their knees. It was horrible living situations. And do you know that our Salvation Army ladies took some helmets, and with a few good cooking things they had, baking powder and flour and lard, and they started making donuts in these helmets. And if you talk to anyone, most anyone from the greatest generation, that's what they remember the most about the Salvation Army. They made these donuts, and they were the first 24/7 donor shop. What happened was, the first time they were making 9 donuts at a time in these helmets. And you know what? The guys were lined up, hundreds were lined up, and so they went from making 100 donuts a day in very short order to making 9,000 a day. They were going 24/7. They moved out of the helmet. I'm sure it was still very antiquated the way they had to make it. Can you imagine 9,000 a day? And that was all on Evangeline Booth's watch. And she did remarkable things. So, William Booth died in 1912. You know, he died 6 months almost to the day after Arizona became a state. The Salvation Army migrated into the United States in 1880. A few years before, a young woman had come over and laid some groundwork, but officially in 1880. And this year is our 120th anniversary of the Salvation Army in Phoenix. 1893, we came to Phoenix. But in the course of his 60-year life, his 60-year ministry, I should say, William Booth did 50 to 60,000 sermons all over the world. I kind of, in my own mind and heart, I liken him to the generation before's version of Billy Graham. What I've learned about him has probably traveled anywhere from 500,000 to 1,000,000 miles. And you think about traveling in those days, in the early 1900s, visited presidents, gave the opening prayer to our U.S. Senator at least twice. When he died, there were 10,000 Salvationists that followed the procession to where the service was being held. 35,000 people attended the service, including Queen Mary. And what a tribute. I mean, I share these things because the heritage of this organization is so great, and we are so grateful for what your industry is doing that we really want you to have a good handle on, you know, hopefully what you're about to embrace in a very big way. And you can be so proud to be working with an organization like the Army. He was, I'll show you one more thing too, just a few of the quotes that came from major publications, you know, at the time of his death. And when Queen Mary was sitting in his funeral, she was kind of off in a corner, as I've read. A woman sitting next to her leaned over and introduced herself and let her know that she was one of the prostitutes that had come to a better life because of William Booth and the Salvation Army. Lots of programs. The culture of the Army really hasn't changed. You saw a list earlier, the human trafficking, the missing person, the social services. The Army is in more than 39 countries with health programs. Actually, they're everywhere with their health programs. But they have hospitals that are devoted just to people with HIV/AIDS, and they get into the issues that are so challenging: the mental health, leprosy, just so many. We have schools all over the country and all over the world. Schools for the deaf and blind. We have a school that's out somewhere in South America that one of our territorial commanders, I think he rode for 4 days. He went from plane to car to horse to mule up into these mountains that, I mean, he had to blow a whistle to get people to come out of the mountains. The Army is there, and they're doing the schooling there. We have substance abuse recovery programs that are so successful, and disaster services. You know, maybe you've heard, most people have heard about the Salvation Army with the kettles, or maybe the thrift stores, or maybe the disaster services. And we have these mobile feeding units that we call canteens, and you can see how long ago that we've been doing this. But these canteens today, we can buy them in varying sizes, but they can feed anywhere from 200 people 3 times a day up to 1,000 people 3 times a day. And when there is a disaster anywhere here or abroad, we're there, and we're typically pulling in right behind the first responders. And 9/11 is a great example. These are a couple of our feeding units, but we have officers who are so highly credentialed in dealing with trauma and things that come out like a 9/11 and hurricanes and things. One of our officers was one of the lead trauma individuals after 9/11, and the Army was charged with handling all the feeding over the 9-month period from that September through May. You can see how many people we assisted with meals, and that was Salvation Army officers and staff and volunteers, 39,000 people. In addition to going into a disaster scene with a canteen and starting to make food, we're there immediately to start feeding and taking care of the first responders and the victims. But we also are the ones who will set up canopied areas or buildings to give out items. Even when you ask the community to send dollars, they are very generous and send other donations as well. Someone has to organize that, and it is huge. The Army typically does that. The Army is there for the emotional support and to help people through the grief as well. And then we also have programs that we set up to give up gift cards to help people get through the food issues and the housing items and everything that they need. And we stay for years in a location, so it's not temporary by any means. We hear that we are the first in and the last to go. Moore, Oklahoma, the mobile feeding units. You'll remember that there were a couple of really big tornadoes on that Sunday night before the big one hit. By that Sunday night, we had already amassed 5 of our canteens from around that geographic area into Moore, and by the next morning we had 9 more. So we had 15. We had 6 the first night, and then we had 15 canteens on the ground in Oklahoma that day, and we were dealing with it. I think one of our officers even lost his home in that whole thing, but the officers put their lives aside at that point and care for them. And we're still in Moore, and we will be there. We're still in Haiti. I mean, you name it. The Yarnell fires, Colonel Basilica was there, and Melanie, our PR person, was there. We have an Army unit of operation in Prescott, but we are going to be there for the long run with them. We're still in Yarnell with the families, did over 12,000 meals, 25,000 beverages. And again, we were there with the feeding units, with the gift cards, and just offering that emotional support. We worked very closely with the color guards who came in, worked extremely closely with the families of the victims of that horrific tragedy. Colonel talked to you about this facility, and this is just back here in the corner, and this is the living quarter that he was mentioning. This is the little living room area, and that one door in the back leads to a bedroom that looks like this, and there's 4 doors in each room. So as he told you, you could just build it out. You can make a little house for a little home for 2 or 3 or 4 people, or 8 or 9 or 10, and we see it all. We're excited to be involved. We have a program called Project Hope. Every day we send a van out with Salvation Army individuals to minister to the homeless, meet them up with them in parks, on the streets, give them water, try to help them understand that there are ways out, and we offer the assistance that we can. We do hydration programs. I trust you all have heard of some of the hydration things that have been going on in the last couple of months. We collect hundreds of thousands of bottles of water, and through various water drives, and then we give give out the things, obviously, to the people in need, but to other agencies as well. There's a very nice camaraderie in the way that that's shared. We have low-income senior housing. We have this facility in downtown Phoenix, and we also have one in Mesa. We are just in the process of doing our back-to-school drive with bags for kids. We have great academic programs, education programs. This was taken down at the Kroc Center in South Phoenix, but just graduated programs of all, depending on what the kids' needs are. They can come to us after school. They get private tutoring with ASU tutors. They get a snack. They get dinner before they go. They have an opportunity to do some physical activity, and it's all free. They don't pay a dime, or does their family. Christmas dinner, Colonel's already mentioned this, but this would be the 5,000 people that was fed in one of the shifts, and it's more than just a dinner. You know, we've got volunteers who really make it happen, and we do the very same thing at Thanksgiving. So between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we probably take care of about 10,000 people. This is the only Christmas photo that some people ever have, and they get to have it taken and they pick it up before they leave. Have games for the kids, just a wonderful dinner. And this is the Kroc Center I mentioned, and boy, you all are invited and you would absolutely love it. It's a 150,000 square foot center at 14th Street and Broadway, and we have it because Joan Kroc, her estate, she left in her estate money for the Salvation Army to build these facilities, so we're very grateful. The largest indoor water park in Arizona. We have a state-of-the-art fitness center, 3 NBA basketball courts, and a 350-seat performing arts theater. And all of these places are available for rent as well. These are just a few, just a handful of the things that the Army does. We've talked a little bit about today. We do a lot with the military. We have a camp in Heber. We take kids up all summer long. We took for a week children of military families, thanks to a wonderful program that Bashes did. There's so much to do, but we need money to do it. And we raise money. We try to raise money all year. We work with grants and whatever. But I would tell you that, and it's important for you to know that the money that we receive on a year-round basis, 83 cents on every dollar goes to our programs, and that's a really good percentage. If people donate to a disaster, 100% goes. There is no pass-through to pull out anything for administrative. Every dime that goes for any disaster goes to that disaster, and it's used usually, as I said earlier, for years. So feel good about that. There is so much integrity wrapped up in this organization, and that's key when we're all as business people doing what we do and spend the time. But it takes the money. 60% of the funding for these programs in our valley throughout the year are covered through the money that we raise in our kettles and for the year-end gifts that we get from donors and some of our major donors. So we're looking at 2 months that are responsible for covering 60%. And there are a lot of parts of the Red Kettle program that might surprise some people, and then Joseph and Joanne will be talking about that. But this is why we are so darn excited about this, because we have this Adopt a Kettle program, and we're about to take it light years ahead of what we were doing. And before I turn it over to Joseph and Joanne, this is how the kettles got started, not with the Eisenhowers, but in 1891, one of our Corps officers who was in San Francisco had committed to serving 1,000 dinners at Christmas, had no money to do it, didn't know what he was going to do, was praying and agonizing, I'm sure, and remembered that when he lived in Liverpool as a military person, he had seen people throwing coins in a pot down by the wharf. So he put a pot down by the Oakland Landing Ferry near Market Street, put a sign that said, "Keep the pot boiling," and collected enough in coins from the fishermen coming in to feed 1,000 people that Christmas. That was in 1891. Within 6 years, that concept, that idea had spread from San Francisco to Boston. And at the end of that 6 years, 150,000 people were fed one Christmas in various communities around the country with that whole idea. And that's how it was born. And then by the early 1900s, they were doing big dinners in Madison Square Garden. So, you know what, even the heritage of the kettles is rich and fun, and you guys get to be a part of it. You're going to just love it. I'm going to turn this over. I just want to show you, I think I have an intro slide for the Cowboys.
Thank you, Marlene. Let's give her a big hand.